At the famous Palanchowk Bhagwati temple in Kavre Palanchowk, the evening arati was underway. Then, according to local people, something unusual appeared on the idol of goddess Bhagwati. Moisture. Many believe that the idol was sweating. For generations, an old belief has existed around Palanchowk Bhagwati. Whenever the idol appears to sweat, some believe it could be a warning of a major crisis or a disaster approaching the country. But this is a religious belief. There is no scientific evidence to prove it. Still, coincidence was striking because exactly 3 days later, a devastating Himalayan disaster struck Rasuwa. Bhote 10. Early morning. Everything in Timure and Rasuwagadhi seemed completely normal. Shops were opening, employees were at work, hundreds of vehicles connected to Nepal-China trade were waiting around the customs area. And perhaps the strangest part was, there wasn't even enough heavy rainfall in Rasuwa that morning to explain Kale. Then, suddenly, the ground began to shake. The first thought was obvious. An earthquake. People rushed outside. But what they saw coming from the upper valley was far more terrifying. It wasn't just water. There was mud, massive rocks, ice, trees, and debris, all mixed together into an enormous mass, rushing down the valley at incredible speed. Within minutes, vehicles were being swept away, structures were being damaged, and people were running toward higher ground, trying to save their lives. And that raised the biggest question. If there wasn't extreme rainfall in Rasuwa, where did such a massive flood come from? To understand that, we have to travel much higher, beyond Nepal, toward the high Himalayan region on the Tibetan side of the border. Preliminary satellite analysis suggests that at an altitude of around 5,200 meters, a large section of glacier may have become unstable and suddenly collapsed. Now, imagine this. Thousands of tons of ice, rock, and loose debris breaking away from high in the mountains and falling into the valley below. This wasn't an ordinary snow slide. It was a massive ice rock avalanche. That enormous mass is believed to have fallen around 1200 meters. And this is where the possible mechanism behind the disaster becomes extremely important. When all that ice, rock, and debris reached the river, it may have temporarily blocked the natural flow of the Lhende river. In other words, a temporary natural dam may have formed inside the river, but there was one major problem. Water upstream didn't stop flowing. The river continued bringing water down, and that water began collecting. Behind the blockage, the water level increased, the pressure increased, and it kept increasing. But this wasn't a concrete, engineered dam. It was an unstable barrier made from loose ice, rocks, mud, and debris. So, as more water accumulated, more and more pressure was being placed on that blockage. Eventually, it reached a point where it could no longer hold the water. The blockage failed. And then, all the water trapped behind it was suddenly released downstream. But it wasn't only water. The flow also carried glacier ice, massive boulders, mud, sediment, trees, and huge amounts of debris. So what was moving downstream wasn't ordinary flood water. It was an extremely heavy, debris-rich surge. And that is exactly why its destructive power was so much greater than an ordinary flood. Normal flood water can enter a house and submerge it. But a debris-rich flow like this can rip the foundation of that house out of the ground. Ordinary water can cover a road, but when that water carries huge rocks and sediment, It can completely erase any sign that a road ever existed there. This massive surge then traveled through the Lhende river into the Bhote Koshi river system, and Timure and Rasuwagadhi became some of the first major areas to experience its impact. And now, let's return to where this story began. Palanchowk Bhagwati. Did the goddess really give a warning before this disaster? Scientifically, there is no evidence that allows us to say that. But the story does raise one important question. People looked for a warning on the face of a goddess. Scientists are looking for measurable warnings in the behavior of the mountains. These are not the same thing, but perhaps the real question is this: before the next disaster begins, will we be able to read the warning signs coming from the mountains while there is still enough time to save lives?